No, dog person. Dog person, see? Yeah. Okay. So, hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are preparing for IELTS, sit closer because I have a guest here, my friend Selin, a former IELTS examiner. Hi Selin.
Hi, Tanara.
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm also good. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation, first
My
of all.
pleasure.
And so let's get started immediately. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you are doing now and what your experience as a former IELTS examiner looked like?
What I'm doing now is I'm studying a master's degree in the States at Kent State University, and I'm also teaching as a GA at the moment. And I have been a TESOL teacher for probably more than 10 years. I examined for IELTS China for 1 year. It was just 1 year. I got the job because I was teaching at university for a long time. So if you're going to be an IELTS examiner, you have to have taught adults specifically for like 5 years in order to do it. You need to have a score of 9 on the IELTS. So you have to have a native speaker English, because obviously 9 is the highest score. That is a native speaker. But no, IELTS is actually a British exam.
The abbreviation would stand for?
International English Language Testing System.
Exactly. For those who don't know, just eliminating you today.
I felt like that was a test.
No, not necessarily. We don't do it here. Come on. How many years have you worked with English learners and IELTS candidates?
Yeah, I've taught English for, I think, 12 years now. I started quite early and I did the IELTS examining, like I said, for 1 year.
Nice. And from an examiner's point of view, what do students misunderstand about IELTS exam?
I think the biggest misunderstanding is that you can study for the exam. You can't study in the sense that you can prepare for a question and be ready to answer that question. Like memorizing and having like phrases that you've memorized to say is not going to help you, because we as examiners will lower your grade if you sound memorized. So if it sounds like you're reciting something, your grade will lower.
That was actually my another question. So since you have already dived into it, why is memorization not a good strategy?
Memorization is not a good strategy because it doesn't show that you actually know something. If you have memorized all of the equations and answers to a math test, that doesn't mean you know how to do math. That doesn't mean that you can actually solve problems. In the same way, if I memorized, for example, 10 phrases in Arabic, does that mean I know Arabic? Like, no, you have to be able to actually speak the language. That's what the test is assessing. The test is assessing your native ability. Your grammar actually doesn't need to be perfect. Your grammar needs to be like a native speaker's. So there are mistakes that native speakers make. That's fine. We would not take off points for a native mistake.
Good to know. Thank you. And what are the most common mistakes students make in the speaking section?
I think one of the biggest mistakes is not speaking. I know that sounds silly, but it's better to say anything than to not speak. So if you just stop and you are stressed and you're panicking and you don't speak, there's nothing to grade, right? Like we can't do anything with that. And so even if you're panicking and you think, maybe someone asks you a question about your grandparents and you think, oh, I don't know my grandparents or something like that. That's fine. You can still say, oh, I actually don't know my grandparents, but I'd love to tell you about my aunt and my uncle. You can just modify the question if it doesn't apply to you, but you shouldn't say, oh, well, I can't answer that question, or
simply
just
avoiding.
Stop. Yeah.
As an IELTS examiner, have you been trained to help students to answer some questions when they don't speak, or?
No, that's actually very important because I feel like candidates don't understand. We cannot do anything to help you. We can't even say, really? can't do anything like that. So if you think that your examiner seems like a robot or seems unfriendly, they have to be. That is part of making the exam the same for everyone. So because it's a standard exam and everyone has to have the same experience, you can't show any sort of like, oh, wow, that's so interesting. You can't do that.
So it means you don't like or dislike the candidates.
Exactly. And I think as a candidate, it can be intimidating to feel like, oh, I said something funny and they're not laughing, or like I said something, and they're not responding.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the job. So just don't take it personally and just keep going.
That's a very important tip. As a former IELTS trainer, I had many students like coming and crying that the examiner, they said the same exact word, like the examiner was just like a robot.
Yeah.
I'm like, you don't take it personal.
Yeah. And you have to realize it's not just that you got unlucky. It is the job of the examiner to be a robot. If they're doing their job well, you will feel that sense. Yeah.
Wow. Sorry, not sorry. Are there any behaviors or answers that immediately lower a student's score?
You can immediately annoy an examiner, but an examiner actually doesn't control your score. So I think that's also a very important thing to understand is, as an examiner, I am not giving a score. I have to understand what is the correct score. So I'm actually being tested on giving the correct score. So if I, for example, gave someone a 7 and their listening, their reading, their writing were all 6s, someone would check my score and say, why did she give a 7? What's going on? And then a second person would give the score listening without knowing my score. Then, if they give a 6 and I gave a 7, a third person would also give a score and check. If my score was wrong, my boss would have a meeting with me. So it's not that the examiner is giving you a score. It's that there is a score. You have performed a certain way and there is a score, and the examiner has to know what that score is. So I think it's also important to realize, like, you're not impressing your examiner. Your examiner is the computer that is calculating what your score is going to be. Now, in terms of lowering the score, that's why I wanted to mention, like, if you annoyed your examiner, it's not going to lower your score because it can't. Even if I'm annoyed, I have to give the same score. But things that could lower your score, for example, like I said, memorization. As soon as I hear something sounds memorized, your score is going to get lowered. If you sound memorized more than one time in a few different places, you can't get a 7. Impossible. So you can't go above a 6 with anything memorized.
Does that mean that you always go back and check the recordings?
No, we don't get to do that. We just have to be really good. We have to know, and usually the examiners, you have to realize we score maybe like 25 exams a day, every single day. So after 1 month, 2 months, as soon as someone starts, you feel like you know their score. By the time the test is finished, you know 100% what is their score. It might change during the exam, of course, because they might be better or worse than you thought. But by the end of the exam, there's no question. You know exactly.
Interesting. I'll share my personal experience. When I was examined, it was my first IELTS exam, and I saw 7 there. I was like, my speaking is 7. During the part 1, they wrote, I was not supposed to see it, but somehow I saw and I couldn't hide it. So then my speaking result was 7. How does it work? Now, as you are saying, I get it.
It's just you've listened to so many people that even the first 2 sentences usually tell you what is this person's fluency, what is the vocabulary that they're using. You know it so quickly. And again, like, sometimes it changes. Sometimes someone was very nervous the first few sentences and then they get fluid and they become comfortable. Or someone is very impressive in the simple things and you're like, oh, they're amazing. And then they say, you get to the harder stuff and they're like, they don't have anything. So sometimes it changes, but usually I would say 90% of the time, I knew the score from the first minute. Yeah.
And what separates band 6 from 7 and 8 and 9?
Like I said, memorization's a big one. I mean a memorized phrase, like anything. I remember one phrase that I would hear all the time that just drove me crazy was, with the development of technology. Please never say that to your examiner. They will probably want to scream. Because everyone is saying it. So it becomes this you don't want to hear the same thing over and over. You have to realize your examiner is doing so many exams. They don't want to hear the exact same phrase over and over. But the phrase, like I said, could be as short as with the development of technology. That is a short phrase. And you might think, oh, it's just a little phrase. They won't realize that this is memorized or that I've learned this to say. We will realize because you will say it in a certain type of way, and we'll realize because everyone is saying it. So I would say the biggest difference for me, usually with a band 6 and a band 7 doesn't even need memorized phrases. Vocabulary is fine, of course, because vocabulary, the only way to learn vocabulary is reading and then memorization and then using it. You do need to study vocabulary,
right.
But vocabulary is just one word. It's not a phrase. It's not going to come across as I've got this thing memorized.
Okay.
So I think vocabulary, the only thing I would caution with vocabulary, if you're not 100% sure about how to use the word, don't use it, because it will only hurt you. It will become obvious that you're trying to use a word that you don't actually understand. So that would hurt you more than it would help you. Don't do it if you're not sure. And then for phrases, if you understand the phrase, you will say it differently, But if you're just oh, this is something I should say, let me repeat it.
Right.
It sounds different, There's this with the development of technology, there's a certain way that you speak when you're repeating something or when a memorized phrase is coming out. You might think you're doing a great job of making it natural, but it's always obvious when someone's memorized something. If you want to study and you want to get better, I always say the only way to get better at a certain skill is to practice the skill. So if you want to get better at writing, reading, listening is not going to help you. It might help you with vocabulary, other things, but it's not going to help you to write better.
Process.
Yeah, you in order to get better at writing, you need to write. In order to get better at speaking, you need to speak. That's the only way. And if you don't have someone to practice with, people think this is embarrassing, but I always say, speak to yourself. Find a mirror, have a pretend conversation. Try to just engage yourself with conversation because, you've got no one else to practice with. You still have to practice speaking. Do that, not just in your head, but out loud. So get over the embarrassment. Think about any language. How am I going to get band 9 in Chinese? I would have to just be so immersed that it's a native language to me. It has to become a native language. I would personally say aim for 8. Because if you're 9, you're 9 and you're not watching this video. Honestly, because your English is so good. Have a conversation with yourself. I highly recommend that.
Awesome. I do agree with you 100%. What about band 9?
Band 9, to be honest, you can't get band 9 without just being that comfortable in English. And there's no job or school or anything that should require above an 8. I think 8 is already you are fantastic. You're just not a native. That's all.
Yeah, good to know. And how much time do you think students should realistically spend on practicing IELTS?
I mean, it really depends on your goals. If you have a test coming up, in 2 months, and it's super important and you need to pass it, I mean, spend every minute you can. I would say do your best to speak in English, even if you're not around English speakers, just whenever you're at home, every thought you think, everything you say, try to make it English. Because again, like, it depends on your goal. If you think, oh, you know what, in 2 years, I would like to improve my English and I would like to become better and I want to pass an IELTS exam. Okay, then maybe spend like an hour every day. And that's great because you have 2 years, right? But again, if you're like cramming, you can't cram for speaking except by saying everything you can in English. That's all you can do. You have to speak. And if you make a little bubble for yourself for 2 months where everything is in English, you know, you might actually get so comfortable in your head with English that you do better on the exam. In general, always try in learning a language to move away from translating in your head. To translate in your head is always going to, number one, slow you down. You're not going to be as fluent, which is one of the things you're scored on. And it's also going to make you sound more unnatural. So when you translate in your head, you're taking phrases from another language and putting them into English directly, and it's not going to sound natural. So of course, try to move away from translation, but you know, if you need it, you need it. I don't know what to tell you.
In general, the intermediate, upper intermediate, and advanced level students don't necessarily need to.
It's a process. It's something you have to work on, like stopping yourself from doing it. But yeah, it is the ultimate goal. Like, you would never want to be fluent in a language where you have to like, that would be so much work. That's not how you want to be speaking a language, ideally, at the end.
What advice would you give for speaking confidence?
I would say speak. I know students kind of hate this when I say it because it's like, you know, they're like, but I'm not confident. That's why I need to improve my confidence. But the only way you get better at something is by doing it. If you feel so unconfident that you just can't make words, practice alone, practice in front of a mirror. Hopefully that doesn't feel scary to you. Even that is too difficult. Maybe listen more. If you're really, really struggling and you think, I have no speaking fluency, then listening can help. You know, it is the input for speaking output. If you think, oh, you know, I know so much English, but I'm just struggling with my fluency and getting everything I know out, you need to practice speaking.
Good. Well, what are the biggest mistakes in sections 2 and 3?
Section 2, if they ask you what your favorite book is, maybe don't choose Harry Potter, you know? Like, try to choose something interesting, you know? Choose something that maybe other people wouldn't have chosen. It will keep your examiner more interested in what you're saying, and it will feel more genuine, more real, because you're talking about something clearly you are uniquely interested in. Harry Potter is great, but it's everyone's answer. And now your examiner is bored. They don't really want to listen to you. Try to choose something unique, something interesting. Also, in part 2, again, if they ask you, for example, what is some advice that you got from a mentor? And you think, oh my God, I don't have a mentor. Suddenly you panic because you're like, I don't have an answer to that. Try to find a way to like move the question. You could say like, you know what, I've never really had a really strong mentor in my life, but my older sister was always, you know, trouble, but also advice, and like tell a story about your sister. Just find a way that you can answer the question. Don't spend your time preparing, blankly trying to find an answer you're not going to find. So if the question is something you feel doesn't relate to you, find a way to make it relate to you. And it's okay to move the question. You don't want to answer something completely different. You don't want to be like, oh, my favorite vegetable? Well, let's talk about soccer instead. You know, like you don't want to just move the question entirely, but you can find ways to say, well, that just doesn't quite relate to me, but here's something similar that, you know, is still on that topic and would still have the same like vocabulary and general idea of how to answer it. So don't let the question make you panic. Another thing for section 3, I would say if you don't understand the question, because sometimes the vocabulary is higher, sometimes it's a difficult question, you might not understand the question. If you don't understand the question, don't just try to answer. First, say, I'm so sorry, could you say that in a different way? I didn't quite catch what you meant. So examiners are told to reword their question only if the candidate asks them to. So we want you to ask because I'm happy to help you by rewording it.
Yeah,
but I can't do it if you don't ask.
You get what you ask for, technically.
Yeah, you like the candidate has to ask for it. The examiner can't do that without having the candidate ask. And asking, again, you're trying to think about this as a native speaker, right? So what would a native speaker do if they were unsure of a question? Be like, sorry, what did you mean by that?
Yes.
That's just like a natural thing to ask. And so again, try to think, what would a native speaker do if they, if they didn't catch what you said, something like that. You would say, yeah, sorry, could you say that a bit differently? And then they're going to ask the question differently.
Yeah, as a side note, if you didn't hear, you should ask for repetition. Could you repeat that, please? And if you don't understand, you should ask for paraphrase. That's what students confuse.
I wouldn't word it necessarily as a paraphrase. I would just say, like, can you say that in a different way? I didn't quite understand what you meant.
Some British and American English differences.
Could be, yeah. Could be.
First of all, thank you again. It was very interesting, and you answered the questions I believe that were useful for students. And don't forget to comment if you have any questions. I can ask Selin. And
happy to answer them.
Get back to you. As a final note, do you have any pieces of advice to IELTS students?
If you have questions, I would say ask them because, you have people who can answer. So I think if you need some particular help, definitely ask because, happy to give you advice. In general, I would just say, don't try to find a quick solution. Just get better at English. And again, in order to get better at speaking, you don't need to read, you don't need to listen, you need to speak. So if you want to get better at speaking, find ways to practice speaking. Again, you don't have a partner, the mirror is your partner. Find a way.
Thank you so much, Selin.
Of course.
Bye.
Bye.